What is the weight of a medal? For some, it is a badge of glory, a piece of polished metal to be worn at parades. For others, it is a heavy anchor, a cold reminder of the friends who stayed behind in the mud and the ash. This isn't just a list of heroes. It is a ledger of survival, of men and women who pushed past the boundaries of human fear until they became something else entirely. These weren't generals moving pins on a map. They were the ones in the foxholes, the ones staring through the scopes, the ones whose hands were stained with the grit of the front lines. And as we will see, the highest honors often come with the deepest scars. Before we dive into these stories of impossible courage, hit that subscribe button. It helps this channel travel further than you can imagine. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight in London, sunrise in Sydney. Let's see how far this history reaches. 1. Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy had the face of a choir boy and the spirit of a thunderstorm. When he tried to enlist, the Marines and the paratroopers laughed at him. He was too small, too slight, just a 5'5" kid from Texas. They saw a liability. They were wrong. By January 1945, in the freezing woods of France, Murphy became a statistical impossibility. With his unit decimated and German tanks closing in, he ordered his men to retreat. He stayed. He climbed onto a burning M10 tank destroyer, a ticking time bomb of fuel and ammunition, and seized the .50 caliber machine gun. For an hour, alone, he held off an entire company of German infantry and a squad of tanks. He was wounded, surrounded by smoke, and shouting coordinates into a field phone while lead rained around him. He didn't stay because he wanted a medal. He stayed because he refused to let his friends die. Murphy became the most decorated American soldier of the war, earning 33 awards, including the Medal of Honor. But he brought the war home with him. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow for the rest of his life. A man decorated in gold, but haunted by the gray. 2. Lyudmila Pavlichenko. If Murphy was a wildfire, the next person on our list was the frost that follows it. Lyudmila Pavlichenko didn't scream into the chaos. She waited for it to go quiet. They called her Lady Death, a title earned with 309 confirmed kills through the lens of a sniper rifle. When the Nazi war machine rolled into the Soviet Union, she didn't head for the hospitals or the factories. She headed for the front. In the hills of Sevastopol and the ruins of Odessa, she became a ghost. She would lie motionless for 18 hours at a time, blending into the earth, waiting for a single breath to exit her target's lungs. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a psychological weapon. The Germans tried to bribe her over loudspeakers, promising her chocolate and officer ranks if she defected. When she refused, they promised to tear her into 309 pieces. She simply smiled and kept count. Pavlichenko became the first Soviet citizen to be received at the White House, where she famously asked the American press why they cared more about the length of her skirt than the caliber of her rifle. She wore the Hero of the Soviet Union Gold Star, but her true legacy was the silence she left behind in the woods. But while Pavlichenko was a master of the long-distance kill, the next man on our list preferred to look his enemy in the eye, even when he had every reason to stay in the hospital. 3. Hans-Ulrich Rudel. If Pavlichenko was the ghost in the woods, the next man was a winged nightmare. Hans-Ulrich Rudel didn't just fly. He waged a private war against gravity and logic. By the time the guns fell silent in 1945, Rudel had flown 2,530 combat missions. He had destroyed 519 tanks, a battleship, a cruiser, and over 800 vehicles of all kinds. But it wasn't the numbers that made him a myth. It was his refusal to stop. Even when the Reich created a medal specifically for him, the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, he didn't see it as a trophy. He saw it as a reason to keep flying. In early 1945, his leg was shattered by anti-aircraft fire and later amputated. Most men would have taken the discharge. Rudel had a prosthetic fitted and was back in the cockpit within weeks, flying with a stump that was still bleeding. He was Hitler's most decorated soldier, a man whose obsession with duty bordered on the fanatical. He didn't flee, and he didn't hide. When the war ended, he flew his Stuka directly into American hands, surrendering with the same cold precision he used to hunt tanks. He survived the war, lived into the 80s, and never apologized for the side he chose. But while Rudel fought for a regime, the next man on our list fought for something much simpler: the man standing next to him. 4. Charles Upham. Charles Upham didn't look like a war hero. He was a quiet, unassuming sheep farmer from New Zealand who hated the spotlight and thought medals were a nuisance. But on the battlefield, he became a force of nature that the German army simply couldn't contain. Upham is the only combat soldier in history to receive the Victoria Cross, the British Empire's highest award, twice. In Crete in 1941, he spent 9 days performing the impossible. He blew up machine gun nests with grenades while under intense fire, carried wounded men out of death zones, and led bayonet charges when his ammunition ran dry. He was shot in the shoulder and riddled with shrapnel, but he refused to see a doctor. A year later, at Ruisat Ridge in Egypt, he did it again. He destroyed a German truck full of soldiers with a grenade while his arm was shattered. He was captured only when he was so badly wounded he couldn't stand. Even in a POW camp, he tried to escape so many times they had to send him to Colditz, the escape-proof fortress. When told he was getting a second Victoria Cross, his only response was, "The boys did the work. I just happened to be there." But as we move from the deserts of Egypt to the frozen forests of the north, we find a man who didn't need a team. He didn't even need a scope. 5. Simo Häyhä. The Finnish forest in 1939 didn't have a floor. It had a shroud of white. And somewhere beneath that shroud was a man who didn't exist until you were already dead. Simo Häyhä was a farmer and a hunter, a man of few words who found himself facing the massive Soviet Red Army. They called him the White Death, and for 100 days he was the most efficient predator on the planet. Häyhä didn't use a telescopic sight. He used iron sights. A scope, he reasoned, caught the light and gave away your position. It also forced you to lift your head just a fraction too high. To hide his breath in the sub-zero air, he kept snow in his mouth. He was a ghost made of ice. By the time the Winter War took its pause, he had over 500 confirmed kills, the highest count in any major war. His story almost ended with an explosive bullet to the jaw that tore off half his face. He fell into a coma, his fellow soldiers piling him among the dead until they saw a leg twitch. He woke up on the day the peace treaty was signed. He lived until 2002, a quiet man who, when asked how he became such a good shot, replied with a single word: practice. Simo Häyhä became a monument to survival. But the next man on our list proved that sometimes a single soldier's fury is louder than a general's command, especially when that command is to give up. 6. Thomas Diver Derrick. The jungle of New Guinea was a different kind of hell, green, humid, and thick with the scent of rot. In 1943, at the Battle of Saddleburg, Australian forces were stalled. The Japanese defenders held the heights, a labyrinth of machine gun nests and cliffs that seemed impenetrable. The order came down from the high command: retreat. The mission was a failure. Thomas Diver Derrick looked at the heights, then at his retreating comrades, and decided the generals were wrong. He reportedly told his commander, "Just give me 20 minutes." Derrick didn't just attack, he climbed. Under a hail of grenades and machine gun fire, he scaled vertical cliffs, hauling himself up with one hand and hurling grenades with the other. He single-handedly destroyed 10 machine gun posts. Every time the Japanese thought they had him pinned, he appeared higher, closer, more lethal. By the time his 20 minutes were up, the impenetrable heights were silent. He had captured the summit alone, forcing the enemy to flee.
Derrick survived that day to receive the Victoria Cross, but unlike Häyhä, he didn't get to grow old. He died in 1945, just months before the end, during the invasion of Tarakan. He was a man who couldn't be stopped by an army, only by the relentless law of averages that eventually catches every hero. And while we're pausing here, in the heat of the jungle and the frost of the forest, take a second, look at the clock. Is it the dead of night where you are, or is the sun just hitting the horizon? We're halfway through this ledger. Let's keep going. 7. Ivan Kozhedub. In the skies over the Eastern Front, life was measured in seconds and gallons of fuel. Ivan Kozhedub didn't just survive those seconds, he owned them. He was the unshootable. By the time the war ended, Kozhedub was the highest-scoring Allied ace, with 62 confirmed aerial victories. But the statistic that haunts his legacy isn't who he killed, it's who couldn't kill him. Throughout hundreds of combat missions, Kozhedub was never shot down. His plane was riddled with holes, his engine often coughed blood, but he always brought the machine home. He was a master of deflection shooting, a man who could calculate the trajectory of a bullet in a split second while pulling 5 Gs. He was the first to down a German Me-262 jet, the invincible future of aviation, proving that a pilot's instinct was still superior to a scientist's engine. In a strange twist of history that mirrors the chaos of war, Kozhedub also accidentally downed 2 American P-51 Mustangs that mistook him for a German. He survived that too. He was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times, becoming a living icon of the VVS. He lived long after the fires of Berlin were extinguished, dying in 1991 just as the empire he fought for began to dissolve. But while Kozhedub mastered the wind and fire, the next man on our list mastered the earth and the cold edge of a blade. 8. Lal Bahadur Thapa. If you want to understand the word fearless, you don't look at a tank, you look at a Gurkha. Lal Bahadur Thapa was part of the 2nd Gurkha Rifles, and in the hills of Tunisia in 1943, he became a legend written in steel. The objective was the WWII, a narrow, rocky path guarded by 2 Italian machine gun nests and a wall of granite. Thapa didn't wait for a tactical plan. He took his kukri, the traditional curved knife of his people, and he ran. He ran through a corridor of lead that should have shredded him. He reached the first nest and silenced it with grenades and his knife. Then, alone, he pushed on to the second. His men, following behind, didn't see a soldier, they saw a storm. By the time they reached the top of the ridge, Thapa was standing over the remains of the enemy position, covered in the dust of the desert and the blood of his foes. He was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor the British could give. Thapa's bravery wasn't calculated or technological, it was visceral. It was the ancient fury of a warrior meeting the industrial machinery of the 20th century and winning. He survived the war and returned to the quiet mountains of Nepal, a man who had looked into the mouth of a machine gun and didn't blink. But as we approach the final names in this ledger, we see that some heroes don't just survive the war. They become a part of its darkest machinery, leaving a legacy that history is still trying to decode. 9. Mateusz Hetzenauer. From the silent woods of Finland, we move to the brutal, shifting lines of the Eastern Front, where another shadow was at work. Mateusz Hetzenauer didn't view war as a struggle for territory. He viewed it as a series of targets. As the most successful sniper in the German Wehrmacht, Hetzenauer recorded 345 confirmed kills. He was a man who understood that a single bullet, fired at the right moment, could stall an entire offensive. Hetzenauer was awarded the Knight's Cross for his uncanny ability to hold back Soviet breakthroughs under conditions that would have broken most men. He survived the freezing mud and the relentless artillery, but like so many on this list, his survival was its own kind of sentence. After the war, he was captured by the Soviets and spent 5 grueling years in a labor camp. He returned to Austria in 1950, a man who had seen the world through a glass lens and spent the rest of his life trying to look away from it. He died in 2004, taking the secrets of his 345 ghosts to the grave. 10. Anders Lassen. We end with a man they called the Viking of the S.A.S. Anders Lassen was a Dane who refused to accept his country's occupation. He fled to Britain and became a legend in the Special Boat Service and the S.A.S. Lassen didn't wait for the war to come to him. He went looking for it. He was a master of the night raid, a man who could clear a German outpost before the enemy even realized the perimeter had been breached. Lassen remains the only non-Commonwealth soldier to receive the Victoria Cross in the entire war. In April 1945, in Italy, his unit was pinned down by 3 separate machine gun nests. Lassen, already wounded and under a storm of fire, charged all 3. He silenced 2 with grenades and forced the 3rd to surrender. As he moved forward to accept the surrender, he was fatally shot. Even as he lay dying, he refused to let his men stop to help him, fearing it would slow down the mission. He chose the objective over his own life. So, what does justice look like for the men who survived the fire, and what is the true price of the medals they left behind? We've walked through the ice with Simo Häyhä, flown through the leaden skies with Ivan Kozhedub, and scaled the cliffs with Thomas Derrick. Some of these men lived to see their hair turn white, hiding their medals in drawers and trying to forget the sound of the guns. Others vanished into the soil of a foreign land just weeks before the bells of peace began to ring. History is a ledger, but it is an imperfect one. It counts the medals, it counts the kills, and it counts the miles gained. But it can never truly count the cost of the soul. These 10 soldiers weren't just warriors, they were the extreme edge of what a human being can endure. Before you leave this history, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It helps us keep digging into the stories that the world almost forgot. And one last time, drop a comment. Who among these 10 do you think carried the heaviest burden? And as you look out your window right now, wherever you are in the world, take a moment of silence for the history that built the ground you stand on. Until the next deep dive, let the past rest, but never let it be forgotten.